Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melinda Salento, the CEO of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's live stream. Today, we're talking about strengthening national resilience and productivity with data, science and technology. Should be an absolute cracker of a conversation, I think. But before we get started, can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands across which we're meeting today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, as well as emerging elders and leaders. One of the great challenges and opportunities, I think, before us as a nation is reconciliation. And I would like to acknowledge the positive contribution and role that so many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and communities play in sharing their traditions, culture, knowledge and insights with us in the spirit of reconciliation. In that spirit, I would like to also acknowledge that Ceda supports their aspirations for reconciliation and empowerment. Before we get on to today's live stream, I also thought it might be worthwhile just giving you a quick update on where Ceda is at the moment. Obviously, we're continuing to run a really full program of live stream events like this, but where we can, we've also moved back to our face-to-face programs. Some of you in New South Wales and Western Australia, for instance, might have been able to enjoy some of those events already. We're looking forward to being able to do more of those in the future, but equally, I just wanted to let you know that we are going to continue delivering our events in this format, a live stream format as well, to allow people across the country to continue to engage in the important conversations and discussions that we're curating, but also the content that we can bring on all matters economic and social development. If you've been following us at all, I think you'll know that we've been producing just an incredible amount of content over the last recent weeks and months, trying to keep our members and wider audience up to date on the most critical issues impacting Australia's economy and society. If you haven't already done so, can I encourage you to have a look at our website, ceda.com.au, and have a look at some of the content that we've put out recently, particularly in respect of the budget. I would encourage you to have a look at a blog that's been put out recently by Ceda board member and chair of the Research and Policy Committee, Jeff Borland, who's taking a look at the government's Job Maker program, which was announced in last week's budget. There's also a really fantastic podcast, the Greater Good podcast with Jared Ball, speaking to a number of younger Australians around their hopes and aspirations and their view of the budget. Now, let me turn to today's conversation. As I said at the start, I think it's going to be a fantastic one. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. We're going to be talking about the role of data science in productivity and economic resilience, in digital transformation and innovation, how we can work together to meet our national challenges, and the role of being able to securely share data in addressing those challenges and improving resilience, productivity and innovation. I do think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. As always, you, our audience, can participate as well. If you haven't already done so, you can have a look at the Q&A portal. It's at the bottom of your video screen, or you can enter the details by going to ceda.pigeonhole.at and use the passcode Digital Economy. We'd also love for you to join the conversation through social media. As always, please tag us at Ceda_news. And the hashtags we're using today are hashtag #DataScienceTech. So please get out there and tweet anything interesting that you think is worth sharing. We always rely on our members to support us in these wonderful events, and in particular our members who are prepared to sponsor our events so that we can bring content to a wider audience. Today, I would very much like to thank our sponsors, the CSIRO and NBN Co, for their sponsorship of today's event, but also for their contribution to our work and support for our work at Ceda more broadly. So, of course, now it's up to me to extend a warm welcome to today's speakers. We have Stephen Rue, the Chief Executive Officer of NBN Co, Dr. Larry Marshall, the Chief Executive of the CSIRO, and Michelle Price, the Chief Executive Officer of AustCyber. In terms of proceedings, we're going to hear from each of them for about 5 minutes or so, and then we'll open for Q&A. Starting off will be Stephen Rue, and we'll finish with Michelle. And as I said, we'll have about 35 minutes for Q&A. So please get onto Pigeonhole and get your questions in. I can tell you, based on the conversation we've already been having, if you don't get your questions in, we're just going to go for it anyway. So please get onto Pigeonhole. And with that, if I could please welcome Stephen to introduce the conversation. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Melinda. And can I say back to you, thank you for the work that Ceda does. It's great to very often partner with you. And I'm joined today, obviously, by Larry from CSIRO. If I again could acknowledge Larry and the work that CSIRO do in really driving science and really innovation excellence, not just in Australia, but worldwide. It's got such an international reputation. And also to Michelle, who, of course, plays a really important role with AustCyber in cybersecurity and also in education. From our own point of view at NBN, we were really thrilled to deliver upon completing the initial build of the NBN network in June this year. I was part of a management team back in 2014 that set out a plan to complete the network actually build in June 2020. And although it's been a remarkable achievement of the team, what really is remarkable is we did not know at the time that, of course, we were building a network that would ultimately support the nation through the terrible time that we've been through internationally from both a health and economic point of view driven by COVID. So we were very pleased to have the network completed and to be able to support Australians through a period when they were working from home, they were educating their children from home, they were connecting with loved ones from home, and ensuring that we had the industry really working collaboratively together to provide the capacity that was needed and also provide the workforce that was needed to connect people and, when necessary, to repair services. And we were also very pleased to work with the industry on a variety of relief measures during the COVID period, to the early time of the COVID period. What I would say about COVID is it has absolutely accelerated changes that we knew were coming in society. We knew that over the next decade there were going to be big changes in the way that, for example, people dealt with their health, their physical health or their mental health. The ways that people would be educated, or again, all driven digitally with digital education, enabling people to work at their own pace, to be able to work with great lecturers or great teachers remotely, and with health, being able to go to visit doctors remotely. I recall vividly being in rural Australia recently and speaking to a psychologist who told me about how she was doing group therapy across a range of her patients, even though they were 1,000 kilometres apart, and she was able to have them all on video working together. I think that's just a small insight into the sort of changes we're going to see going forward. And of course, with working, we now have seen the time working from home. We see that people now can communicate with work and can work regardless of where they live. And I think that is clearly going to drive changes in remote working, but also in where people live that will have ongoing impacts in things like property, but also out of suburban parts of cities and regional rural Australia going forward. But also we're at the forefront of the digital economy with changes to the sort of way that people conduct their business, the sort of new applications that will be built, the new companies indeed that will be built because of the digital world, the fact that people can now market their products internationally, the fact that people can be more productive through using cloud-based tools, the fact that in fact people can hire people from, again, more remote areas perhaps, or distance from where they work, and can access great skill sets. And I've touched on it, but I think it's going to have a big impact on regional Australia as well to ensure that it remains vibrant, very relevant, and indeed I think we'll see people move more to regional Australia to live. So these changes we knew were coming, but of course COVID, I think, has accelerated a lot of that, with people being proven to be able to work from home, with people obviously seeing their doctors and our children being educated at home. So each year we prepare a 4-year, what we call corporate plan in conjunction with the government, which is really an outlook of how the company is going to perform, and in NBN's case, where we're going to invest to ensure that we continue to meet consumer needs. So we, as part of this year's corporate plan, have announced a $4.5 billion investment into further digital capabilities. So broken down by 700 million on really targeted small and medium business, 300 million to work with states to co-invest in regional and rural Australia particularly, and 3.5 billion on our what we call our fixed line networks to ensure that 75% of people on fixed line networks can order our highest speed services by 2023. And these investments we saw was crucial to ensure that we continue to meet the needs of consumers going forward as those digital changes continues to evolve. And of course, it also had the impact of, it will have the impact of creating shorter term jobs at the very time that the economy needs those jobs in construction or project management or design, and indirect jobs in supply chain, and obviously with spend in local cafes and so on. Now, why do we do that? At NBN, we talk about lifting the digital capability of Australia. That's our purpose. We talk about it a lot. Our people talk about it a lot. And what does that mean? Well, it's not just about technology. It is about consumer needs. It is about ensuring that we help the citizens of Australia. Really, we play our part in assisting them in making the most out of the digital environment that we're in. And today is actually a great day for us because CSIRO and NBN have announced a collaboration partnership together, whereby essentially we will facilitate the sharing of data. So for NBN, we actually gather real-time broadband data every 15 seconds, in fact. And we can use that. That data is very interesting to be able to use. So, for example, we could see when children finish their school hours, for example, by the sort of the change in the data that we saw, or we can see the impact of people working from home or communicating late at night with friends and colleagues overseas. Equally, we get a lot of data on energy usage, and so data. That sort of data we can use. We can basically what we call de-identify it and atomize the data, aggregate it, so it's completely free of any personal information, and then use that data to do some data science and see what we can learn from that, which is why CSIRO really are important for us with their skill sets in with Data 61 and data analysis and their general concepts around science and innovation. So what we plan to do is work on a range of programs with CSIRO, things like digital health or education that I talked about. An early thing that we do plan to work on is workforce changes and seeing the impact of people working from a different location. Therefore, what do we need to do as a nation to assist with innovation or assist industry as they translate to a new digital world? And that's just one example. So, in summary, we're really at the cusp of a challenging time in Australia, but also an exciting time whereby the digital economy will take off, and I think we just need to be ready for the ride.
Thanks, Stephen. That's a nice little handover. I think partnership with the CSIRO and ready for the ride. So, Larry, over to you to tell us what that might look like.
Look, thanks so much, Melinda. And can I also begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional owners of the land that I'm on here today in Sydney, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as the owners of all the lands where everyone is joining us from across the digital world. Great conversation, Melinda, that we had, you and I, Michelle and Stephen, before this started. And it's amazing how naturally we leverage the digital tools that are enabling the digital transformation of our country. If I think back a year ago, the sentiment in Australia was sort of more like digital transformation was on the agenda, but it wasn't at the top of the agenda. It was a project most companies had underway in some form, but it wasn't the foundation of every single thing they did, as it is today. We're working actively on a vaccine for COVID-19, but the digital economy has already received a massive shot in the arm, and we're seeing milestones we forecast happening over the next 5 to 10 years happening in 5 to 10 months. It's truly extraordinary, the number of businesses that have jumped on this transition. And Stephen, the pressure on your network is extraordinary. And I've got to say, your team is doing a phenomenal job of managing through a very, very tough situation. So hats off to you. You know, the pandemic has really given us an opportunity, even an imperative, to really rethink and understand what our fundamental strengths are in our business models, in our people, and as a nation, and how we can amplify and accelerate our advantages through the application of digital technologies. And the businesses who come out of this pandemic and the recession that we're in also, that will be even stronger than they were going in, are the ones that really understand how to leverage science and technology, especially digital, to reposition themselves to be in a much better place. Now, recently, CSIRO launched a portfolio of missions. These are large-scale, major scientific and collaborative research projects focused on delivering very specific solutions from science to our classic national challenges to help us create the jobs, and even in some cases, new industry, to drive economic growth and recovery and resilience from COVID-19 and the associated recession. And we really believe this missions approach is a great way to bolster Australia's economic recovery and really build up this long-term resilience in the nation. And they cover areas that are in one sense obvious and parts of them not so obvious, where technology and science can be used differently. But traditional areas like drought and drought resilience, and turning in things like climate change into, rather than an impediment, leveraging what's going to happen and our ability to adapt to it to give us a better economic outcome rather than a worse one. Driving much greater uptake of science and technology in our SME sector, creating new sources of renewable energy like hydrogen that we can export, and equipping our financial sector with the tools to actually quantify risk and actively plan for and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Now, there's a whole list of missions on our website, and they're all looking for partners because they are truly collaborative exercises, and we really want to cooperate with more than just the 3,000 customers in industry that we have today. We want to go much broader than that. Now, what's really interesting about missions is every single mission draws on bigger and bigger data sets that have been enabled by digital technologies. And they're actually able to extract the meaning, the insight, and the impact from those decades of domain experience in areas like agriculture, energy, climate, and manufacturing. So there's a real opportunity here to uncover value in those data sets and play to our strengths, not start from scratch with our innovation. Now, last month, we also released our COVID-19 Recovery and Resilience Report, which really focuses in on the opportunities we think Australia has a really strong unfair advantage to recover stronger and build back better. And it's a pivotal time in our history. And, you know, the inclination when you're in a crisis is to kind of batten down the hatches and use the safe pair of hands approach and postpone investments. But that's not what we should be doing now. We really need to stare down the barrel of this crisis, lean into our investments in innovation, because science and technology will drive our economic recovery. We'll come back faster and we'll come back better. Crucially for Australia, your national science agency and your national broadband network, as Stephen said, are really teaming up to drive this imperative. Now, CSIRO is the most connected player across the research ecosystem. We work with every single university across the country, every government department, and every industry, but NBN connects us all together in a way we've never been connected before. And because this world is an increasingly connected place and the globe is flattening, it's changing the whole barriers to entry and exit from traditional industries, and technology like robotics and artificial intelligence are really changing the way we operate in everything from healthcare to agriculture. And they're all leveraging this amazing asset in the NBN. Now, our partnership really facilitates the generation of insights of how we're adopting digital technologies to solve the really important issues to drive our economic recovery. And together, as national agencies, we can really deliver a unique national outcome. As Stephen said, our first project goes right to the heart of the biggest shift experienced across the nation in businesses of all sizes as we reconsider what was known once as the dark satanic mills created by the Industrial Revolution and look at the Renaissance as we go back to the future, to the age of the artisan and the craftsman working in our homes. It's an amazing journey back to the future enabled by the NBN. Now, the Digital Workforce Project will bring together CSIRO's world-class digital and data science team and analysis and insights and NBN's unique and substantial data sets. And together we can better understand how Australia has been moving online, how we can better survive the pandemic, how we can better leverage digital capability. We can use the NBN network traffic data to develop baselines for the digital maturity of whole sectors, jobs, households and communities, and start to build an understanding of how we can accelerate this to give better well-being, better outcomes across all of our communities, no matter where they are in the country. And that's so important because everyone has to come on this journey of recovery and resilience together. Now, it's only our first project together, but it will not be our last project. We are seeing all kinds of amazing opportunities to move forward as we deliver this really important outcome from this great partnership. Now, I'll stop there because there's a lot to talk about, but we should talk about it together collaboratively, because how we get out of this pandemic and recession is through much deeper collaboration, and that can only happen through connectivity enabled by Stephen's team at the NBN. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Larry. And you're really speaking my language there on collaboration, as anyone who's seen me on any of our live streams would know. Just before I get to Michelle, for the audience, I am getting some questions through on Pigeonhole. So if you've got one, please get in there. There's also some questions for you around what you think is important, and I'd love to be able to report on those as well. So if you've got any interest in that, please get on the Pigeonhole, ceda.pigeonhole.at. Michelle, some great opening there. I'm going to go straight to you on an issue that we were talking about before, which is sitting right in beneath all of this collaboration and data sharing is the really big challenge around trust, security, all the rest of it. So over to you for some insights on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Melinda, and I too will chime in. We should not be ashamed to be able to celebrate the greatness of the talent that we have in Australia. And, you know, Melinda, absolutely, your organisation and you with your leadership in Ceda is so important at times like this to be able to get cut through. And I think also for the work of Stephen and Larry, goodness gracious. If that introduction didn't paint a picture for the audience around why we need people who are very passionate and focused, like Stephen and Larry at the helm during times like this, as well as when we're actually just trying to crack on and grow our economy, then I don't know where we are. Maybe we are in the third dimension or into the matrix. But I echo, my sentiment towards all of you, the amazing work that we can do in collaboration as well. Trust and security, it's such a big thing at the moment, of course, and it relates very much to the worlds that Stephen and Larry and Ceda and all of us occupy. I do a lot of work as part of the role that I play at AustCyber in shaping and influencing what in the broader sense of the world is known as the fourth domain of human engagement, being cyberspace. So you can refer to it as the digital world, the digital domain. Once upon a time, which was not so long ago, maybe only 6 or 7 years ago, we referred to it as cyberspace. And of course, it became a moniker that was associated with sci-fi movies. We know that sci-fi movies at some point become true. And so, of course, that reference that you've made to Back to the Future there, Larry, I love instantly. Who did not just have a face of Michael J. Fox in their mind as soon as you said that? But all of these different cues that we have available to us to be able to try and make sense of the world that we find ourselves in. That has become, in the sense of cyberspace, a malicious actor's playground, as much as it is a playground for us to be able to try and develop new things, innovate, invent, and be able to find new forms of employment and satisfaction in life. And as you know, I started to say, some of the work that I do in shaping and influencing the environment that we can provide to the economy to feel safe and secure in going about our cyber physical world that we have. I do a heck of a lot of work with the World Economic Forum. And in some of the recent discussions that we've been having at the WEF around the great reset that we find ourselves in and the Global Futures Councils that are trying to work on the sort of the global sense of these big missions that Larry referred to that we have as the human endeavour now. If cyberspace is the fourth domain of human engagement, then I'd like us to appreciate that actually that's the domain that we created. So irrespective of what your religious beliefs are and all of those kinds of things that become quite philosophical very, very quickly, from a physical context, land, sea, air as the other 3 domains of human engagement on the planet. And, you know, in some senses, we're starting to crack out into a 5th domain, of course, in space, with it becoming a thing again. We created cyberspace. Us humans created it. It's been through the intersection of science and technology that cyberspace has come to exist. And so one of the things that we're focused on globally through the WEF and has trickled down through a whole series of government to government and government to business conversations is this sense that can kind of get a little bit dark. Are we sleepwalking into the next phase of convergence? And if we are sleepwalking, then goodness, we need to wake up, because the opportunities are enormous. And for us to take advantage of those opportunities, we actually do need to deepen the amount of trust that everybody has within this domain and the way that the digital domain or cyberspace engages with the other domains that we exist in. So that piece around trust is so critical now. And if we cast our minds back pre-pandemic, pre sort of drought and fires and floods that this country is so well known for internationally, we were actually having conversations as part of a global Western conversation about distrust and whether or not we can still trust our institutions and whether or not we can still trust the same lines of social communication that we have become ingrained in our everyday lives. And so when we think about that concept of trust and how it's such it's a subjective assignment of an emotion that's informed by knowledge, or sometimes not, the info wars are proving that sometimes we don't assign anything to it. Trust is actually something that we need as humans to feel safe. It's what we rely on when we're trying to navigate uncertainty. And we've never been in more uncertain times for all of the generations that are alive today. So trust, when we look at that as it applies to the digital domain, and as we are trying to look at new ways of sort of replacing the jobs that are falling out the bottom of the economy, and we know from all of the statistics, including those that are generated out of CSIRO futures. I love CSIRO futures. Can I just put in a plug there for CSIRO futures? We do lots of work with them. This has all been validated that, of course, actually the number of jobs that are being created out of the knowledge economy are actually far more than what's falling out the bottom of the economy. So it is a massive challenge of retraining, but it's also a really big opportunity and challenge in the complexity of it around how we do manage that convergence that I mentioned at the beginning, because that's where the new skills are needed the most. We can tweak and reframe some of the competencies and some of the application of those competencies, but the aptitude to be able to manage convergence is where we really genuinely are going to see the friction occur, and is where we're going to see the transaction costs of bringing new innovation and inventions to the market dramatically increase. And as a government in Australia, for Australia's governments, plural, perhaps we might be able to push a little bit further. Maybe this is something we can do, Melinda, is encourage the National Cabinet to remain a part of our landscape, is that to create the right kinds of conversations, to be able to point to these things in a positive context. These are things that, with a population of our size in Australia, with a very advanced economy relative to many of our neighbours, we can put our arms around this, we can squeeze it and we can grow it. And we'll not only grow the size of the pie, actually create new pies and show a better way for the rest of the world. Now, that might sound a bit lofty, but from an economic standpoint, which of course is where Ceda is framed, it's actually critically important that we do that. Because not only for the next 10 years do we need to do that, but actually for all future generations, as we look back at this time when we're borrowing from our future economically to be able to deal with the recovery, we have to make sure that we are returning at least a 20x quotient on every dollar that we're spending in recovery. That's not just government money, that's also industry and academic money. We have to do that, otherwise we won't get the productivity. Because for me now, it's not about efficiency. It's about value in a different way. And it is about the productivity that can come from that as we try and inspire the next generation of leaders to come through in this new networked way of thinking rather than hierarchical way of thinking. And being able to leverage all of the different smarts that we have available to us, whether that is a 3-year-old that can hack into an iPhone just by watching mum or dad or grandma or grandpa, and how that code into their phone, or it's somebody that's near end of life that has had a truly compelling set of adventures, at this juncture, to be able to share that knowledge and be able to help us to continue to grow. So that trust in the digital domain that we have, that's enabling all of this data sharing that Larry and Stephen spoke about, to be able to have the trust in that delivery of networks and infrastructures that support all of the physical activities that we do. We have got so many choices that we can make right now. And I put it as a choice and emphasize that, because those choices around what we make really will change whether or not we're sleepwalking into this convergence, or we're absolutely celebrating the heck out of grabbing hold of it and embracing the risk that comes with the uncertainty, because we have the trust in play. Thanks, Melinda.
Thanks, Michelle. Fantastic energy and enthusiasm for it. And I think, for anyone who's seen the comments that we put out after the budget, I think, one of the things that we identified was we actually thought there was an opportunity to sort of double down on this digital opportunity. Larry, we've spoken before, you talk about placing some big bets. I think there's an opportunity there to really grab onto the progress that we've made, the great leap forward, if you like, in this digital space where we've shown ourselves what we're capable of. And Larry, again, you spoke around, the flattening of the world. This is everyone's looking around at the uncertainty about globalization in the way that we know it, but the next era is the era of digital globalization. So, how do we capture those opportunities and I think use them as an opportunity to build confidence in our recovery, which becomes self-fulfilling in a virtuous circle, if you like. So I very much share your enthusiasm and excitement, Michelle. I'm looking at the questions that are coming through, and listen to the conversations, and I think there's an opportunity for us really to have a discussion about two key things in particular. One is around collaboration. And what we've seen through this crisis is business, community, government working together to respond to this crisis as best possible. So how can we carry that forward, pay that forward, if you like, to continue to build opportunities, not just in crisis, but aspirationally. And then the second thing, I think, is just this issue around where we're at in the digital economy. Yes, we've taken this big leap forward, but where does that position us relative to others? So I'm going to start with the first question that I've got from, it's actually an anonymous question, I think, but anyway, which is questioning, should companies and government work together to boost innovation and productivity in Australia? I think I'll answer that, yes. But what are the roadblocks to that collaboration, and can and should collaboration be better incentivised? And maybe I'll start with you, Larry, and then Stephen. Just you're collaborating. Are there things that would make it easier? What are the barriers? What more could be done? Perhaps you first, Larry.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'll touch on two aspects of collaboration. So the general one about, people, companies, researchers collaborating together. Australia is the lowest collaborating nation in the OECD, and yet an outcome of the crisis, as you mentioned, Melinda, is that we've had to collaborate in a way we haven't done before. And, we've put our scientists on the shop floor in manufacturers to make surgical masks. Angus has done the same thing with the armed services. We've put our people into organisations like CSL to help figure out how to make vaccines. And we're doing things that we would normally not have done. And if we can bottle that and carry that feeling forward, as you said, to good times and take those learnings with us, we'll really be in a great place. But the other aspect of collaboration is humans and machines. And I think, and I've seen many companies overseas make fatal mistakes with digital, kind of being dazzled by digital and bringing in massive teams from Silicon Valley to reinvent their companies, rather than valuing the knowledge and the domain experience that their own people already have. And some of the best digital outcomes I've seen, and that we've seen inside CSIRO itself, is where we've put the two together, digital experts, domain experts. And one of the great memories I have of Michelle, you may not know this, but Michelle's background is in agriculture, but she's a digital expert and she understands agriculture. And she chairs an advisory group to advise me on digital investments. And she does exactly that. In her brain, she puts together everything that she knows about agriculture, a very traditional market, and everything that she knows about digital, a very new market, and she gets the best of both. If we can do that collaboration as well, not see machines and digital as taking our jobs, but actually leveraging our capability as humans, then equally we'll progress much better into the future.
And Larry, just do you see, you talked about Australia being the lowest collaborating country. Is this a cultural issue? Is it, are there disincentives to doing it? How do we break those silos down? It's a conversation we've had before, but where's the secret sauce here?
Yeah, lowest in the OECD. And look, we're a very competitive nation. We love to compete on the sporting arena. But it seems what we love to do most is compete against each other. When I ran a US venture fund, the easiest way to get a deal in Australia was to let the New South Wales government and the Victorian government both know that you wanted to come, and they would compete for you. And that's silly. We need to be smarter than that. If we can unite the best elements of the capability that we have, and this is how I run CSIRO and have done the last few years. We don't think about our capability as just what we have in CSIRO. We think about what problem do we need to solve for the nation, and who do we need to bring into the tent from wherever they are in government or in industry or universities, so that 1 and 1 makes 5, so that we get a global top 10 or top 0.1% capability by creating a virtual team through collaboration. If we can make that infectious so that it persists way beyond the current crisis, we will be a much better country as a result.
Stephen, you've formed this partnership with CSIRO. Maybe just speak to your perspective from the business side of things. I mean, in some ways, you're taking data to CSIRO. Data is your asset. What are you getting out of that exchange, and what's the incentive or the motivation for NBN to be partnering with CSIRO?
Yeah, well, if I could say a few things, I think one of the things that was very evident to me at the time that really in March, when it was obvious we were going to go into lockdown, and we were, as a nation, we were going to have to also deal with the coronavirus. What was extraordinary was how much the industry and governments and regulators actually came together in the telco industry to support the community. The way that NBN collaborated with our retail partners, with the regulators, with the industry, indeed with the various states and territories, in ensuring that we could work across borders and ensure that we could continue our critical services, was quite extraordinary. And I thought that what we have thought about is how can we harness that collaboration at a time of crisis to ensure that we continue that collaboration going forward. So that's the first point I make. The second point I make is the work with Larry and his team is one of multiple collaborations that we do. So we could sit here as a national broadband network and talk about technology, but actually it's not about that. It's about consumers, and it's about why was NBN created in the first place. And one of the principal reasons was to drive social and economic benefits across the nation. But to do that, you've got to talk with people, you've got to listen with people. So we have teams in regional rural Australia called NBN Local, and they collaborate with multiple people. For example, distance education, or with local councils and regions, and how can NBN be part of improving regional Australia and bringing the needs for digital needs is one part, but also digital education. And we have a team in the metros called NBN Metro, and they go equally and talk to groups like small business, which I'm sure you'll come to that later. I'll talk about small business separately maybe, but collaborating with small business organisations is crucial to ensure that we help provide services to drive what is the engine of the economy going forward. So CSIRO is just part of it's another collaboration we want to do to drive particular segment strategies. So agriculture is a classic example of where the data needs for people in the agricultural sector are crucial, so that they can drive productivity and they can remain relevant and competitive in an increasingly global market, for example. Tourism is another example, Indigenous community another example. So what we've done is set up various, under the NBN local and metro teams, to set up various collaborations to drive segment strategies in health and education and so on, as I said. So what I would say is that it's increasingly important, I think, for the public and private sectors to work together as we enter into this new phase, not just getting our economy and our health out of the current situation it's in. But longer term, all those changes I was talking about in terms of how people work, where they work, how they conduct their health, their education, and new businesses, it's so important that the government helps drive structures, whether it be infrastructure, tax systems, whatever it may be, and that we in the public sector assist the private sector in driving forward what's needed for the consumers, fundamentally.
Michelle, trusting your partners, trusting your data, keeping your data secure, all those things are critical if we're going to be able to collaborate. What do you think the priorities are there? Are there significant gaps? Where the investments? What's your sort of hit list, if you like?
Yeah, and I note that I've got a dog barking in the background, so please forgive the difference in the sound there. Welcome to working from home. So I think that there's a lot. I guess I'll frame the answer to the question around just how significant the threat landscape is when it comes to cyber threat and how that manifests as cyber risks. And I do really want to remind the audience that, of course, when I say cyber risk, I'm talking about both upside and downside risks. The media spends a lot of time talking about downside cyber risk that tends to scare a lot of people off from engaging with the complexity of cyber risk. But there's a lot of upside, and part of that upside is being a trusted business or trusted organisation or institution that can grow our prosperity and while also growing productivity. So the threat landscape really has changed up. There's no two ways about it, and that is because as we moved into the pandemic and the first wave of lockdowns globally, a lot of the digital infrastructure that was being leveraged in a hurry by workplaces to be able to enable their workers to work from home and for kids to be able to do school from home, almost all of that infrastructure was insecure. For a whole range of reasons. We can follow a lot of threads back to understand why, but there's kind of not enough time. That's a whole other webinar, I think. But it was largely insecure. And so organisations like Stevens had to actually really jump on top of that very, very quickly and take account of the fact that we were dealing with a very, very insecure landscape. Whereas previously we were able to ring fence it. As much as most organisations don't have the cyber maturity that we really genuinely do need to properly defend against the sort of overwhelm of malicious cyber attacks, when you can ring fence it to your own organisation and deal with endpoint security in a quite different way, you can at least point to what you're not doing well. As soon as you kind of enter into the environment that we've been in, it completely changed the game. In fact, it flipped on its head about 1,000 times a day. And it continues to do so because the playground has just suddenly gotten bigger. The attack surface got enormous. And so we've seen a huge amount of recycling of traditional and very old attack methods, as well as at the same time, while we've all been really focused on infrastructure from home and the ability of small businesses to be able to move into the digital world very, very quickly and dealing with vulnerability there, we've had a whole bunch of very, very sophisticated malicious actors taking advantage of the distraction and going after critical assets within the country as well. And the Prime Minister has obviously spoken about that a number of times publicly, and businesses know all too well what's going on there. And yes, there are nation states involved in that. We do know that. And I think the plethora of nation states is only growing. So then I think to answer your question, there's what we're seeing as a result of all of that at a time when organisations and individuals necessarily will become more conservative about how and where they're spending their money. And so to be able to prioritise the investment in cybersecurity to enable that trust becomes really, really challenging. But it's at the time when we need it most. To be able to engender the trust in the relationships, again, I'll use Larry's words here, the relationship between humans and machines has become critical. Australians are, we know, early adopters of technology, but we're early adopters through usage, not necessarily understanding of how those things work, whether they're things or they're actually intangible. We just adopt them. We trust that they're actually going to do what the box says they're going to do and how they connect to each other. And so therefore, by inference, we also trust the people that are engaged with that as well. All of that's been completely ripped wide open in the latter stages of the pandemic response. And now as we move into recovery, The security components to this, and then by association, the privacy components of this have become very, very important. And I don't think we're having enough open, transparent conversations about the impacts of these kinds of elements on the relationships around how we foster greater collaboration. When we know that collaboration has implied trust at its very foundation of making it work. And so to go to some of the other points that have already been raised, I'd summarise those by saying that in amongst all of this, very, very silently, the transaction costs have been going up. Whether those transaction costs are to do with forming joint ventures or joint agreements around a collaborative approach to solve a problem, to be able to supply each other with the needs that we have that are complementary, or to be able to just muck in and get something solved very, very quickly. So the government here has a very, very important role. And I'm going to say something that I know will go against something that the Treasurer said on this very kind of format with Ceda not so long ago, a couple of nights ago, is that the Treasurer is very, very strong on making sure that government doesn't intervene where there is not a market failure. I would like to contend that in this context, there is no such thing as market failure anymore. The government is an actor just as much as everybody else is in this equation. And rather than using the language of market failure, what I believe the role of government is at the very fundamental, at the concrete level. We've talked about wet concrete today. The concrete's setting very, very slowly. It means there's lots and lots of ambiguity. The government's role here, I believe, is to dramatically reduce, if not remove entirely where it's needed for national interest, those transaction costs. Because it's the transaction costs that really do enhance that competitive nature that Larry spoke to and that Stephen's hinted at. That when we know that in Australia, when the chips are down, we actually really do embrace each other. We saw that in droves during the bushfires. We can muck in. And then again, only a couple of months later to try and solve the PPE supply problems. And then again, as Larry's people are gathering up all of the smarts that we have available in Australia that the rest of the world loves and we've been silent on at home about getting a vaccine solved. We can do these things, but as soon as there's cost involved, whoa. we back away. And that's where the famous Australian risk aversion comes into play. And it's like, well, who's going to pay? I don't have any money in the bank. Well, I do have some money in the bank, but it was assigned to something else. So there is no market failure anymore. It's about how we do assign the right roles to be able to leverage the removal of that friction and lower those transaction costs to be able to take advantage of those unfair competitive advantages that CSIRO have described for us. Because if we don't go after those, where will the jobs of the future be? Because they can't be in traditional areas anymore. We won't be able to subsidise those costs anymore. We just can't. They'll be far too high.
So a nice segue there, I think, for one of our questions. Neil Thula, I think, apologies if I've mispronounced your last name there, Neil, but is asking a question about where the data science and tech opportunities are in terms of responding to and preparing for natural disasters, and sort of building back our sort of resilience in that sense. And perhaps to you, Larry, on that. And then I'm sure Stephen might have something to say on that too, given the important role of our telecommunications infrastructure in dealing with and responding to natural disasters.
Sure, and I'll just say you can see now why Michelle is such an amazing chair of an advisory group for me investing in digital. So the Prime Minister asked CSIRO to map out the National Science and Technology Recovery and Resilience Plan back in December last year. And it's hard to remember, but before the pandemic, we had the bushfire crisis. And we identified a sort of a roadmap. And again, we did it very collaboratively. We already partner, CSIRO's been in bushfire research for 70 years. We've looked at every major fire in the country since Ash Wednesday and tried to learn not just how to predict and prevent fires, but how to make our structures, our buildings more resilient to them. And we do that in partnership with every state, every fire service. It's a classic example of collaboration. To amplify Michelle's point, for decades it's been that way, because in a crisis, Australians do naturally join together, and things like drought and bushfires are things that we've had with the driest continent on the planet. So we're very familiar with that. But what we learnt is as good as our science and technology has been in those areas, and we do a platform for every state to assess the risk of fires and the impacts of climate change on that risk, and to predict where fires might happen. But we're in a different regime now. The impacts of climate change have really started to manifest in ways that we can physically measure in bushfires. And that means we need to really lean on predictive analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to actually outthink the fire, to get ahead of it and to really accurately predict its behaviour, so that firefighters can actually outthink it and get ahead of it. And that's a huge area in recovery for us. The other thing that comes from that capability is the potential to build a whole national risk map where we're able to quantify the risk of a particular area, geography, climate, etc., and then use that as a tool where each state can figure out their prescribed burning, their other mitigation efforts, and plan for how they're going to respond to a fire. None of that would be possible without the breakthroughs in artificial intelligence. But again, it only works because of the genius of our firefighters and their decades of experience on the ground, helping us point the AI, the artificial intelligence, at the right problems to give them practical solutions that they can deploy. And you only get that from true partnership between human and machine.
Stephen, anything you wanted to toss into that conversation?
Look, from my point of view, working with people like Larry to understand where the risks may be is very important for us. And of course, we're now at the time when we're on high alert. Once we get into this October now, unfortunately, it's getting earlier and earlier because of the climate change issues that Larry alluded to. But we're now at the time when we start thinking about ensuring really how our network can continue to be resilient and reliable during that period. A lot of talking about collaboration. A lot of what we do during that period is collaborating with states, collaborating with the various emergency services, but also with the energy companies, because the bushfires is a classic example of where energy and telco increasingly converge. So, for example, our issues during the last bushfire season, 90% of them were energy related, not telco related. So, but from NBN's point of view, we want to be there. We want to be there supporting the community when it's needed. We sent various trucks down into bushfire zones to enable people to communicate when they weren't able to. The telecommunication services were down. Those trucks we send are connected to our satellite services, so therefore we're able to communicate, to continue to communicate. We obviously work very closely, not just with energy companies, but particularly with Telstra during that period and mobile networks. But to me, it's about understanding where the risks are, and then ensuring that we share information as best we can across states, across emergency services, and across our energy partners to work on behalf of the community. And another example would be ensuring that people can still have access to grocery stores. For example, one of the big problems in bushfires were people couldn't get food because they couldn't actually access money, or they couldn't go into a store and use a NetPlus machine. And again, how can our satellite services provide backhaul that can help that going forward? So I think we did well out of the bushfire season, but boy, there's always learnings, and again, data is very key to that.
Yeah. Now I'm just going to set the scene for the next 7 minutes because boy, time flies with you three. I would really like to talk about digital competitiveness, and I've got one particular question here, and I'm going to put you on notice. I'm going to ask you about whether the government's doing enough on data sharing and what your wish list might be there, which is also a kind of slightly nuanced question from one of our speakers. But from Richard Dowling, I've got the question around what are the most indicative benchmarks to measure Australia's progress in digital and technology in the digital tech economy, and whether we're doing enough to, not just keep up with our peers, but eventually to hopefully get ahead of them. Michelle, I might start with you, and then Larry and Stephen, and then I'm going to come back to you on data, and then hopefully I'll get the results of our survey.
I can answer it actually reasonably quickly. Surprise, surprise, that's a new thing for me. I actually think that I'm going to raise the thing that I know has been raised at Ceda before. we don't place the right kinds of value around intangible assets. A lot of what we're talking about in this context, and most of the activity that happens within cyberspace, not around and across cyberspace, but within cyberspace, is intangible. This is not just a problem that's being faced by Australia. I know that this is a bit of a kind of spiky kind of debate in sort of taxation circles in Australia, but from a policy standpoint, but also from just an everyday activity standpoint, whether you're a sole trader right up to the largest government organisation, intangible activities and intangible assets are critically important for us to be measuring and valuing now. I think it's part of the reason why some of our sort of metrics are skewed. It's ignoring most of what's going on in the economy right now, let alone what's been transitioning over the past couple of years and what needs to happen beyond. So I think from a framework perspective, we need to take proper account of intangibles, and we also need to look at that convergence piece again. So if we sort of take that intangible and tangible kind of quotient or a set of quotients, I'd contend that we need to do, and I'm going to give away some of our own IP right now at AustCyber. We're in the process of working on a trust index, a bit similar to the Standard & Poor's index. That's a bit of an interesting concept, isn't it? To be able to kind of point to something that we know around trust in the digital world, but also around that point of convergence. And so if we take what's been in the budget as an example, how do we measure value and activity that has occurred from an economic standpoint at the convergence of advanced manufacturing into space, into defence industry? All convergent value and supply chains that we're not measuring or capturing very effectively right now. Intangibles. I'll leave it there.
Larry, how are you seeing our performance for starters, if you can give us a postage stamp, how do we even measure it? What do you think is important and how are we stacking up?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of metrics, just specifically around innovation. We've measured with hard data that companies that innovate are twice as likely to see an increase in productivity as companies that don't. And that's because as a company, you either invest in growth or you focus on cost reduction. And unfortunately, you can't save your way to success. It's fine to do cost reduction if you've got a plan to invest those savings in innovation or in growth. But if you don't, then you're kind of on a spiral down. The other metric that's really always struck me, if you define innovation as new to world rather than being an early adopter, but new to world innovation, about 2% of Australian companies do that. Compared to Canada, which is very similar to Australia in many senses, it's closer to 40%. What did the Canadians do? Because they used to be 2% just like us. What did they do to move from 2% to almost 40%? And a lot of the things that we've done in CSIRO the last 5 years have been borrowed from what worked in Canada. Not copying from, say, Silicon Valley or other places, but again, recognizing that our culture is quite unique and things that work in Silicon Valley won't work in Australia, but we can adapt them and apply them in the Australian context. And then probably final point around collaboration, we tend to think like the cost cutting as a step. Many businesses cut cost to survive COVID, but far fewer businesses invested those savings into innovation to grow their way out of COVID. We tend to be more of a zero-sum gain mindset, which is why we're so competitive. That's true in research, academia, and in business. We tend to think that if for me to win, you have to lose. And the fact is, innovation creates value literally from nothing, particularly digital innovation. So it's possible for partners to work together, create a whole new value that didn't exist before, sometimes even a whole new market. And if you're creating value literally from nothing, it's very easy to collaborate because there's plenty to share from the proceeds of collaboration. We're not good at figuring that out, but we are getting better at it. And I think that's the roadway to us leveraging digital, leveraging collaboration, and growing our economy.
Thanks, Larry. Stephen, I'm sorry to do this to you. You've got about 37 seconds.
That's fine. I have a similar answer to Larry, actually. I think it's digital capability of small and medium businesses. We did a large survey across a million businesses, actually, small and medium businesses, and found that those who invested most in technology grew their employment and grew their revenue by 3.5%, and those invested most in the internet actually grew their employment and revenue by 5% more than people who invested less. And it's just about having that capability to be able to market wherever you want to go, or to use tools that are in the cloud. So we just got to educate, I think, and get digital capability into people running small businesses, which will drive the innovation that Larry's talking about.
Thanks, Stephen. You sort of addressed a question here too around what's NBN doing around investing in some of the capabilities and research. And I think the work you're doing around small business absolutely answers that question. Is really important to highlight. We have run out of time. I knew this was going to happen. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. To the viewers, we are keeping the Pigeonhole app open, so if you want to bring some questions into the conversation, we'll get some answers for you and email those out to participants in today's event. We'll also get the results of the survey. Let me thank again our sponsors, the CSIRO and NBN Co. And can I put in a little plug for some work that Ceda is doing in an event that we're looking to host a little bit later this year, which is on the topic of public interest technology, which is really having a conversation with the nation about how we can build community confidence that that technology is being developed, adopted and used in the public interest and for the public benefit. And it goes straight to a lot of the issues that Michelle was talking about in the trust space. So please do watch out for that. And then finally, can I thank again Larry, Stephen and Michelle for their wonderful contributions. I promise we'll get you all back again. We might have to allow a bit more time. And thank you again to CSIRO and NBN for their sponsorship, and not just for today, but for a lot of work that Ceda does. To the audience, thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and I look forward to catching up at the next one. If you're interested, Julie Bishop, Copeland Leadership Lecture this Friday, ceda.com.au if you want to register. Thanks so much.